The cantina on Nexus Prime was filled with smoke and the chatter of a dozen different alien species. In the corner booth, Commander Zexthera sat with his back against the wall, all four of his arms resting on the metal table. His gray skin showed old battle scars and his yellow eyes looked tired. Around him sat 6 young Kethmori officers, their blue uniforms still clean and bright. "Tell us about the Centauri campaign," said Lieutenant Vextal, leaning forward with excitement. "They say you took 3 systems in 1 month." Zexthera took a long drink from his glass. The liquid burned as it went down, but it helped quiet the memories that always came at night. "That was easy," he said in his rough voice. "The Centaurians fought like we expected. They had rules. Honor codes. When we broke their main fleet, they surrendered like civilized beings." "What about the Crystal Wars?" asked another young officer. "You were there when we conquered the Silmari homeworld." The old commander nodded slowly. "Also predictable. The Silmari were tough, but they fought to protect their cities. When we threatened their civilians, they gave up their military positions. Standard warfare? Nothing unusual." The young officers looked disappointed. They had heard these stories before. Everyone knew about the great victories of the Kethmori Empire. They wanted something new, something exciting. "What about the humans?" asked the youngest officer, barely out of the academy. "We heard you fought them too." The cantina suddenly felt colder. Zexthera's 4 hands tightened around his glass and his mandibles clicked together nervously. The other aliens at nearby tables went quiet as if they could sense the change in the air. "You don't want to hear about the humans," Zexthera said quietly. "Come on, Commander," Vextal pressed. "The humans were just primitives, right? Our records say it was a quick victory." Zexthera let out a sound that might have been laughter, but there was no humor in it. "Your records lie." He looked around the table at the eager young faces. "You really want to know about the humans?" All 6 officers nodded eagerly. The old commander was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to speak, his voice low and careful. "It started 3 years ago. High Command found a new world in an outer spiral arm, rich in quantum crystals and rare metals. The survey team said it was inhabited by a species called humans." He paused to drink again. "The intelligence reports made them sound weak. They had only just developed faster-than-light travel. Their ships were small and poorly armed. Their planet was divided into hundreds of separate nations that fought each other constantly. High Command called them fragile bipeds with short lifespans." One of the young officers snorted with amusement. "Sounds like easy prey." "That's what we thought," Zexthera continued. "The War Council decided it would be a simple resource acquisition. Send in the 5th Fleet, destroy their military, take control of their mining operations. They estimated 2 weeks for complete victory." "2 weeks seems generous for primitives," said Vextal. Zexthera's eyes went distant, looking at something the others couldn't see. "I was fleet commander then. 47 ships under my command. Battle cruisers, destroyers, support vessels. The finest fleet in the Empire." He remembered the feeling of confidence as they jumped into the human system. Their ships had spread out in perfect formation, ready to demonstrate Kethmori power to these backward aliens. The plan was simple. Destroy their orbital defenses, bombard their military bases, and wait for their surrender. "The first ship we encountered was tiny," Zexthera said. "A human patrol vessel maybe 1/10 the size of our smallest destroyer. Our sensors said it carried maybe 30 crew members. We sent them the standard surrender demand." "Did they run?" asked the youngest officer. "No." The word came out like a whisper. Their captain sent back a message. I still remember his voice, calm, almost cheerful. He said his name was Jake Morrison, and he was the commander of something called the Defiance. Zexthera closed his eyes, remembering that moment. The human's voice had been so casual, like he was talking to an old friend instead of a massive alien war fleet. Morrison said something that confused us at first. He said, "You picked the wrong species to mess with." Then he did something that made no sense at all. The young officers leaned closer. Caught up in the story despite themselves, "He attacked us." The silence stretched out for several seconds. Finally, Vextal spoke up. "Attacked? 1 ship against your entire fleet?" "1 small ship with basic weapons against 47 advanced warships," Zexthera confirmed. It was suicide. It was insane. It was human. He remembered watching the tiny vessel turn toward his flagship. Morrison had actually accelerated, charging straight at the center of the Kethmori formation. The tactical computers couldn't understand what they were seeing. In all their databases, there was no record of such behavior. We tried to capture them alive, Zexathera continued. They were obviously defective somehow. We used low-power weapons to disable their engines. But they kept coming. When their main drive was destroyed, they used backup thrusters. When those failed, they used attitude jets. That little ship kept moving toward us even when it was clearly dying. The old commander's voice grew quieter. Morrison stayed on the communication channel the whole time. Even when his ship was breaking apart around him, he was talking to his crew, encouraging them, telling them they were making Earth proud. I heard him say something about someone called Lisa Barnes, a lieutenant who had told them that if aliens could bleed, humans could win. What happened to the ship? Asked one of the officers. It exploded when it got within weapons range of our formation, but not before it did something impossible. Somehow, that tiny vessel managed to damage 2 of our destroyers with its final attack. 2 ships, each 50 times its size, were crippled by a dying human patrol boat. Zexthera drained his glass and signaled for another. We thought it was a fluke. Some kind of equipment malfunction. Maybe the humans were using experimental weapons. We prepared to continue with the invasion. But, Vextal prompted. But then more human ships appeared. Dozens of them. All small. All attacking. The old commander's mandibles clicked rapidly now, a sign of deep stress. And every single one of them fought exactly like Morrison. No retreat. No surrender. Just attack, attack, attack until they died. The young officers exchanged glances. This wasn't the kind of story they had expected to hear. That was our first hint, Zexathera said quietly, that we had made a terrible mistake. Zexthera stared into his fresh drink, watching the blue liquid swirl around the glass. The young officers waited patiently, knowing better than to interrupt when a veteran was remembering a battle. The cantina around them had grown quieter, as if other patrons sensed the weight of the story being told. After Morrison's ship exploded, we had 17 minutes of calm, the old commander finally continued. My tactical officer was analyzing the wreckage, trying to understand how such a small vessel had damaged our destroyers. The weapons officer was recalibrating our shields. Everyone was treating it like a technical problem to be solved. He took a small sip and continued. Then Lieutenant Kexenol at the sensor station started making distress sounds. I asked him what was wrong. He said the sensors were malfunctioning. According to his readings, we had 43 human ships approaching our position. Reinforcements? Asked Vextal. That's what we thought at first. But these ships weren't coming to rescue anyone. They were coming to fight. 43 vessels, none bigger than Morrison's patrol boat, moving straight toward our fleet in what could only be an attack formation. Zexthera remembered the confusion on his bridge. His officers had looked at each other in bewilderment. In all their military training, they had never encountered a species that responded to overwhelming force with more aggression. I opened a communication channel to their lead ship. The captain was a female human named Lisa Barnes, the same Barnes that Morrison had mentioned. I explained to her that resistance was pointless. I told her that one of their ships had already died uselessly, and I offered to accept their surrender with honor. The old commander's laugh was bitter. Barnes listened to everything I said. Then she asked me a question that I still don't understand. She said, "Do you have families, alien?" When I confirmed that Kethmori have family units, she said, "Good. Then you understand why we're going to kill every last one of you." One of the young officers shifted uncomfortably. She was just trying to sound tough. "No," Zexathera said firmly. "That's what I thought too." But then Barnes did something that proved she meant every word. She transmitted her attack plan to all the human ships. On an open channel? She wanted us to hear it. The plan had been simple and terrifying. The human ships would split into small groups and attack different parts of the Kethmori formation. They would focus on engine systems and weapon batteries, trying to disable rather than destroy. Their goal wasn't to win a traditional space battle. Their goal was to hurt the alien fleet as much as possible before they died. Barnes called it a blood price, Zexthera continued. She said that every human who died would cost us 10 times their value in damage and casualties. She said they would make us remember this day forever. The attack began exactly as Barnes had described. The human ships came in fast, using their smaller size to dart between the larger Kethmori vessels. They targeted weak points with surgical precision, hitting shield generators and weapon mounts with remarkable accuracy. The ship called Thunderstrike was commanded by a human named Rick Coleman. He flew his vessel directly into our formation center, drawing fire from 6 of our destroyers. His ship was torn apart in seconds, but while we were focused on him, 3 other human vessels attacked our flagship from behind. Zexithara's voice grew quieter as he remembered the sounds of his own ship being hit. The bridge lost power for 40 seconds. When the lights came back on, my weapons officer was dead and our main gun was offline. 1 human ship had done that much damage in a single attack run. But what disturbed the Kethmori commander most wasn't the damage. It was the voices he heard over the communication channels. Human pilots talking to each other as they died. There was a pilot named Tony Parker flying something called the New Hope. When his ship lost engines, he used his remaining weapons to clear a path for 2 other human vessels. As he was dying, he was laughing. Actually laughing. His last words were, "Tell my wife I made them pay." Another human, Danny Wright, had piloted his damaged ship directly into a Kethmori cruiser's docking bay. The explosion had killed Wright instantly, but it also destroyed the alien ship's fighter complement and damaged their main reactor. Every human ship fought until it was completely destroyed, Zexithara said. Not damaged, not disabled, destroyed. They would keep shooting until their weapons were gone, then ram us with their ships. When those were too damaged to fly, some of them ejected in escape pods and tried to attack our vessels with personal weapons. The young officers looked at each other with growing unease. This wasn't how civilized species fought wars. "How many of their ships did you destroy?" asked the youngest officer. "All of them," Zexithara replied. "Every single human vessel was eliminated, but they took 11 of our ships with them. 11 ships destroyed or too damaged to continue fighting, lost to 43 primitive patrol boats." He paused to let that sink in. In any normal battle, such losses would have been considered acceptable. But this hadn't been a normal battle. The worst part was what we found afterward. When we examined the wreckage of the human ships, we discovered something that changed everything. These weren't military vessels. Not really. They were converted civilian ships. Cargo haulers, passenger transports, even a few private yachts. The humans had taken whatever ships they could find and turned them into weapons. Zexithara remembered the report from his salvage teams. The human ships had been modified with whatever weapons and armor their crews could find. Some had mining lasers welded to their hulls. Others carried improvised missile launchers made from cargo containers. Lisa Barnes had been a freight pilot before the war started. Morrison had transported passengers between human colonies. Tony Parker had hauled ore for mining companies. These weren't trained soldiers. They were ordinary civilians who decided to fight. The implications had been staggering. If these were just random humans with converted civilian ships, what would actual human military forces be like? "We found personal recordings in some of the wreckage," Zexithara continued. Messages the humans had made for their families. A pilot named Amy Foster had recorded a goodbye for her children. She said she was sorry she wouldn't see them grow up, but she couldn't let aliens hurt them. Another recording had come from Steve Murphy, who commanded a converted mining ship. He had told his wife that he loved her, then explained why he had to fight. "If we don't stop them here," Murphy had said, "they'll think humans are easy targets. We have to make them understand that we cost more than we're worth." That phrase kept appearing in the recordings, Zexithara said. "Make them understand that we cost more than we're worth." It was like a rallying cry for them. The old commander looked around the table at the young faces staring back at him. "We thought the battle was over. We thought we had won. Our fleet was damaged but intact. The human forces were completely eliminated. According to every rule of warfare we knew, the humans should have surrendered." He took another drink, longer this time. But humans don't follow the rules of warfare. 3 hours later, while we were still repairing battle damage, our sensors detected another wave of human ships approaching. 60 vessels this time, and these ones were bigger. The silence at the table was complete now. Even the ambient noise of the cantina seemed muted. "That's when we realized the truth," Zexithara said quietly. "The humans weren't trying to win. They were trying to teach us a lesson, and we were about to learn it the hard way." The cantina had grown even quieter now. Other aliens at nearby tables had stopped their own conversations and were listening to Zexithara's story. Word was spreading that the old Kethmori commander was finally talking about the human war. Zexithara noticed the attention but didn't care. The alcohol was helping him remember things he had tried hard to forget. "The second wave of human ships was different," he continued. These were actual military vessels. Destroyers, cruisers, even a few battleships. Their commander was someone called Admiral Kate Sullivan. He remembered Sullivan's first transmission clearly. Unlike the earlier human pilots, she hadn't wasted time with threats or demands. She had simply stated facts. Sullivan told us we had 30 minutes to withdraw from human space. When I explained that the Kethmori Empire doesn't retreat from inferior forces, she said something that chilled me to the bone. She said, "Then you're about to learn why every species in the galaxy leaves Earth alone." The young officers exchanged nervous glances. They had never heard of any species that other aliens avoided. "I tried to negotiate," Zexthara continued. "I offered to limit our occupation to uninhabited worlds. I suggested we could share the system's resources." Sullivan listened to everything I said, then gave me her answer. She said humans had only one rule about aliens in their space: get out or die. The battle that followed had been unlike anything in Zexthara's experience. The human ships moved with coordination that seemed impossible for such an aggressive species. Sullivan commanded her fleet like a master musician conducting an orchestra. "The humans had studied our first battle," the old commander explained. "They knew exactly how our ships moved, how our weapons worked, how we thought. They had adapted their tactics based on watching their own people die." The human ship called Defiant, commanded by Captain Joe Bennett, had approached the Kethmori formation in a way that looked suicidal. But instead of ramming them, Bennett had used his ship as bait, drawing alien fire while other human vessels attacked from unexpected angles. Bennett's ship took tremendous damage, Zexthara said. His hull was breached in 17 places. His life support was failing. But he kept fighting. When I asked him to surrender, he said something I'll never forget. He said, "We don't surrender. We make you wish you'd never found us." Another human captain, Beth Turner, had commanded a destroyer called Freedom's Price. When her ship's weapons were destroyed, she had ordered her crew to ram the nearest Kethmori vessel. But at the last second, she had changed course, using her ship's explosion to blind alien sensors while other human ships escaped. Turner died saving her fleet, Zexthara remembered. But before she died, she transmitted targeting data that allowed 3 other human ships to destroy one of our battle cruisers. Even in death, she was helping her people fight. The young officers were silent now, absorbing the implications of what they were hearing. This wasn't how wars were supposed to work. The worst part was their wounded, Zexthara continued. "We disabled a human ship called the Liberty Bell, commanded by someone named Paul Hayes. The ship was dead in space. No power, no weapons. By all military conventions, it was out of the fight." He paused to drink, trying to wash away the memory of what happened next. Hayes and his crew didn't accept being out of the fight. They used emergency power to restart one weapon system. Then they waited. When one of our ships came close to investigate the wreckage, Hayes fired everything he had. He destroyed a Kethmori destroyer with a single shot from a ship that should have been dead. That had been the moment Zexthara realized they were fighting something completely outside normal military experience. Humans didn't seem to understand the concept of being defeated. "We captured some human prisoners after that battle," the old commander said quietly. "I thought interrogating them would help us understand their psychology. I was wrong." The first prisoner had been a young human female named Helen Price. She had been a medical officer on one of the destroyed ships. When Zexthara asked her why humans fought so desperately, she had given him an answer that made no sense. Price said they fought because they were free, and freedom was worth any price. When I pointed out that they could be free under Kethmori rule, she laughed. She said aliens could never understand freedom, because we still thought in terms of rulers and subjects. Another prisoner, a weapons officer named Chris Adams, had been even more confusing. When asked about human military strategy, he had said there was no strategy beyond making the aliens regret starting the war. Adams told me that humans had a saying, "If you want peace, prepare for war." He said his people had been preparing for war their entire species' history, not against aliens but against each other. They had learned to fight from thousands of years of constant conflict. This revelation had disturbed Zexthara greatly. Most species developed spaceflight only after achieving planetary unity. Humans had reached the stars while still fighting among themselves. The prisoners all said the same thing, he continued. They claimed that fighting aliens was actually easier than fighting other humans, because aliens were predictable. Humans, they said, never fought fair. The third battle had proven this point. Admiral Sullivan had withdrawn her fleet, making the Kethmori think they had won. But 3 days later, while the aliens were establishing orbital stations, human ships had appeared from nowhere. They came from the outer system, Zexithera explained. Small ships, fast and quiet. They had been hiding in asteroid fields and behind moons, waiting for us to get comfortable. Their leader was a captain named Linda Chase. Chase's ships had hit the Kethmori supply lines, destroying fuel tankers and ammunition transports. When alien reinforcements arrived, the human ships had vanished again, only to appear somewhere else and hit different targets. Chase never fought fair, Zexithera said with something almost like admiration. She would attack our weakest ships with her strongest forces. She would hit us when we were resupplying or when our crews were resting. She turned war into a hunting game and we were the prey. The psychological effect had been devastating. Kethmori crews had become nervous and exhausted, never knowing when or where the humans would strike next. Some alien ships had started firing at their own shadows. We tried to adapt our tactics, the old commander continued. We spread our ships out so they couldn't hit multiple targets at once. Chase responded by concentrating her entire fleet against single ships, destroying them quickly and disappearing before help could arrive. The breaking point had come when Chase's ships attacked a Kethmori hospital vessel. The ship had been clearly marked and was caring for wounded aliens. Under every rule of civilized warfare, it should have been safe. I contacted Chase directly and accused her of violating the laws of war, Zexithera said. She told me that humans didn't recognize laws written by aliens. She said the only law humans followed was survival of their species. When he had pointed out that the hospital ship contained wounded Kethmori, who posed no threat, Chase had given him an answer that still gave him nightmares. She said that every alien who survived would go home and tell others about fighting humans. She said it was better to make sure no one survived to encourage future invasions. The young officers around the table looked sick. This wasn't warfare as they understood it. That's when I realized the truth about humans, Zexithera said quietly. They don't fight to win territory or resources. They fight to make sure their enemies never want to fight them again. They turn war into something so terrible that you'll do anything to avoid experiencing it twice. He finished his drink and signaled for another, and we still hadn't seen the worst of what they could do. The cantina was completely silent now. Even the bartender had stopped cleaning glasses to listen to Zexithera's story. The old commander seemed unaware of the attention, lost in memories that clearly still haunted him. After 6 months of fighting, High Command decided we needed a different approach, he continued. The humans were costing us too many ships and too many lives, so we changed our strategy. Instead of fighting their military, we would capture one of their civilian worlds and use it as leverage. The target had been a human colony called New Denver. It was lightly defended with only a small garrison and minimal orbital defenses. Intelligence reports suggested it had a population of about 2 million civilians, mostly farmers and miners. The invasion was perfect, Zexithera said. We overwhelmed their defenses in 6 hours. The human military commander, a major named Danny Wright, was forced to surrender when we threatened to bombard civilian areas. We thought we had finally found a way to make humans reasonable. The young officers leaned forward, eager to hear about a Kethmori victory for once. We were wrong, the old commander said flatly. Humans aren't reasonable. There's something much worse. The first sign of trouble had come 3 days after the occupation began. Kethmori supply convoys started disappearing, not destroyed by military action, but simply vanishing without a trace. When search teams investigated, they found abandoned vehicles and no sign of what had happened to the crews. At first we thought it was Major Wright, Zexithera explained. We had him in custody, but we assumed he had escaped or had hidden troops somewhere. We increased security and started searching for military holdouts. But the attacks continued and they were getting worse. A communication relay was destroyed by explosives. A fuel depot caught fire mysteriously. A patrol of Kethmori soldiers was found dead in what appeared to be an ambush. When we examined the attack sites, we found something disturbing, the old commander continued. The explosives were improvised devices made from farming equipment and household chemicals. The weapons used against our patrols were hunting rifles and improvised firearms. This wasn't a military resistance. It was something else entirely. The truth had been revealed when they captured one of the attackers. She was a human female named Nancy Bell, and according to her identification, she was a school teacher. Bell had been responsible for destroying 3 of our supply convoys, Zexithara said. When I asked her where she had learned military tactics, she said she hadn't. She said she had learned from watching how humans fought each other in their history books. Under interrogation, Bell had explained that the resistance wasn't organized by surviving military forces. It was organized by ordinary civilians who had decided that alien occupation was unacceptable. She told me that every human on the planet had voted. The old commander continued. They had decided that death was better than living under alien rule. The vote was unanimous. 2 million people and not a single one chose to collaborate. This had been incomprehensible to the Keth Mori. In their experience, civilian populations always included some individuals willing to work with occupying forces in exchange for better treatment. The concept of an entire population choosing resistance was unprecedented. We tried to find collaborators anyway, Zexithara admitted. We offered better food, medical care, protection for families. Nothing worked. Even when we threatened to execute civilians, other humans would volunteer to die in their place. The resistance had been led by people who had no military training but plenty of motivation. A factory worker named Tony Parker had organized a network that provided weapons and supplies to resistance cells. A farmer called Chris Adams had used his knowledge of local terrain to set up ambush sites. Even human children had joined the fight, carrying messages and supplies to areas the Keth Mori thought they controlled. The worst part was their adaptability, Zexithara continued. Every time we changed our tactics, they changed theirs. When we started using scanners to detect weapons, they switched to improvised explosives made from common household items. When we began searching vehicles, they started using underground tunnels. The Keth Mori had tried increasingly harsh measures to control the population. They imposed curfews, restricted movement, and began detaining suspected resistance members. But every action seemed to create more resistance rather than less. A human female named Amy Foster was typical, the old commander said. She was a nurse in the local hospital. We arrested her for treating wounded resistance fighters. While she was in custody, her husband organized an attack that freed 12 other prisoners. When we recaptured them both, their teenage son took over their resistance cell. The psychological pressure on the occupying forces had been enormous. Keth Mori soldiers never knew who might be an enemy. The friendly human who served them food might be poisoning it. The human child playing in the street might be carrying a bomb. The elderly human asking for directions might be reporting their movements to resistance fighters. We lost more soldiers to the civilian population than we had lost in all the space battles combined, Zexithara admitted. Our troops became paranoid and jumpy. Some of them started refusing to patrol human areas. The breaking point had come when Major Wright, still in custody, had been visited by a human delegation. They wanted to negotiate his release in exchange for ending the resistance. The Keth Mori command had been eager to accept. The delegation was led by a human female named Beth Turner. She was a local politician, someone with no military experience at all. She made us an offer that seemed reasonable. The humans would stop attacking our forces if we released Wright and agreed to limit our occupation to specific industrial areas. Zexithara had been suspicious, but his superiors had ordered him to accept the deal. They needed to reduce casualties and establish some kind of stable control over the planet. We released Wright at the designated meeting point, the old commander continued. Turner and her delegation were there waiting just as promised. Everything seemed normal until Wright reached the human group. What happened next had been the most terrifying display of human nature that Zexithara had ever witnessed. Wright didn't thank us for his release, the old commander said quietly. Instead, he asked Turner if the evacuation was complete. When she confirmed that all non-combatants had been moved to safety, Wright smiled and activated a device he had been carrying. The device had been a signal transmitter. Within seconds of its activation, every piece of human infrastructure on the planet had exploded simultaneously. Power plants, communication centers, transportation hubs, even residential buildings had been rigged with explosives. The humans had spent weeks preparing for that moment, Zexithara explained. They had evacuated their own people and booby-trapped everything they were leaving behind. In 30 seconds, they had destroyed an entire colony rather than let us use it. The young officers stared at him in shock. This level of destruction was beyond anything they could imagine. Wright looked directly at me and said something I'll never forget. The old commander continued. He said, "Now you know what it costs to occupy a human world. Every planet will be the same. We'll destroy everything rather than let you have it." Turner had nodded in agreement. She told me that humans had learned this strategy from fighting each other. She called it scorched earth, and she said it was an old human tradition. They would rather rule over ashes than live under foreign control. The implications had been staggering. If humans were willing to destroy their own worlds rather than accept occupation, then conquest was meaningless. There was no point in capturing territory that would be worthless. That's when I realized we couldn't win. Zexathera said quietly, "You can't conquer a species that's willing to destroy everything rather than submit." And humans had proven they would do exactly that. He looked around the table at the young faces staring back at him, but we still didn't understand the full horror of what we were dealing with. The worst was yet to come. Zexathera's fourth drink sat untouched on the table as he stared into the distance. The cantina had become completely silent, with dozens of alien beings hanging on every word of his story. The young Kethmori officers no longer looked eager for tales of glory. They looked frightened. After the destruction of New Denver, High Command realized they had made a terrible mistake. The old commander continued. The humans had proven they would rather die than submit. But our empire had committed too many resources to simply withdraw. The War Council decided on one final strategy: total destruction of the human homeworld. The plan had been simple and brutal. If humans wouldn't surrender, then humans would be eliminated. A massive fleet of 200 ships would attack Earth directly, destroying all life on the planet. With their homeworld gone, the scattered human colonies would be forced to surrender or face the same fate. "I commanded the assault fleet," Zexathera said quietly. 200 of our finest warships, including the Empire's 3 super dreadnoughts. We had enough firepower to crack a planet in half. The humans had maybe 60 ships defending Earth, and most of those were damaged from earlier battles. The young officers looked confused. This should have been an easy victory for the Kethmori. "Admiral Linda Chase commanded the human defense," the old commander continued. "The same Chase who had been hunting our supply lines for months. When we arrived in Earth's system, she transmitted a message to our fleet. She said that humans had one final lesson to teach us. Chase's message had been broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every ship in both fleets could hear it. Her voice had been calm and steady, with no trace of fear despite the overwhelming odds against her. Chase said that humans had spent their entire history learning how to fight impossible odds." Zexathera remembered. "She said that every human child learned about battles where small forces had defeated much larger ones. She mentioned names like Thermopylae, the Alamo, and Stalingrad. I didn't know what those words meant then. The human admiral had explained that these were all battles where humans had fought against overwhelming numbers. Sometimes they had won, sometimes they had died to the last defender, but they had always made their enemies pay a terrible price for victory." Then Chase said something that changed everything. The old commander continued. "She said that Earth had prepared a special welcome for us. She said that humans had learned from every battle we had fought, and they were ready to show us what they had learned." The battle had begun exactly as Zexathera expected. The human ships were outnumbered more than 3 to 1, and many of them showed damage from previous fights. But within minutes it became clear that something was very different about this engagement. The human ships moved like nothing I had ever seen, he explained. They fought as a single unit with perfect coordination. When one ship was damaged, 2 others would immediately move to protect it. When we concentrated fire on their largest vessels, smaller ships would swarm our attackers. Captain Joe Bennett commanded a ship called the Constitution, one of the largest human vessels. When Bennett's ship was surrounded by 6 Kethmori destroyers, instead of trying to escape, he had done something unprecedented. Bennett deliberately flew his ship into the middle of our formation, Zexathera said. He used the Constitution as a shield for other human ships while they attacked our flagship. Bennett died in that maneuver, but his sacrifice allowed 3 other human captains to cripple our command vessel. The pattern had been repeated throughout the battle. Human commanders like Steve Murphy and Paul Hayes had thrown their ships into impossible situations, trading their lives for tactical advantages. But unlike the earlier desperate attacks, these sacrifices were part of a larger strategy. Every human death served a purpose, the old commander explained. When Captain Beth Turner's ship was destroyed, she managed to disable our point defense systems. When Lieutenant Chris Adams died, his ship's explosion blinded our sensors. They were trading their lives for strategic objectives, but the most terrifying part had been the human reinforcements. Just when the Kethmori fleet thought victory was certain, new ships had appeared throughout the system. They came from everywhere, Zexthara said, his voice barely above a whisper. From behind moons, from asteroid fields, from the outer planets. Hundreds of ships that our sensors hadn't detected. Chase had been holding them in reserve, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The reinforcements hadn't been military vessels. They were converted civilian ships just like the ones from the first battle. But these were different. These ships had been modified specifically for fighting Kethmori vessels. A converted cargo hauler commanded by Danny Wright, punched through our battle line like it was made of paper, the old commander continued. A passenger liner under Captain Amy Foster disabled 2 of our battle cruisers with weapons that shouldn't have existed on a civilian ship. The humans had spent months studying captured Kethmori technology and developing specific countermeasures. They knew exactly where alien ships were vulnerable, and they had built weapons designed to exploit those weaknesses. The worst part was their communication, Zexthara said. Throughout the battle, I could hear human pilots talking to each other. They weren't panicked or desperate. They were calm, professional, even cheerful. They talked about the battle like it was a job they were doing. One transmission had stayed with him. A human pilot named Tony Parker, flying a converted mining ship, had been giving advice to a younger pilot who was nervous about her first battle. Parker told her that fighting aliens was just like mining asteroids, the old commander remembered. You find the weak spots, you apply pressure in the right places, and you break them apart. He made it sound easy. The tide of battle had turned when Admiral Chase revealed her final surprise. Earth itself had been turned into a weapon. The planet's orbital defense platforms weren't just protecting Earth, Zexthara explained. They were part of a massive weapons system that turned the entire planet into a gun. When Chase activated it, Earth fired a beam of energy that destroyed 3 of our super dreadnoughts in a single shot. The young officers gasped. Super dreadnoughts were supposed to be unsinkable. That's when I gave the order to retreat, the old commander admitted. We had lost more than half our fleet, and the humans were still fighting. If we had stayed, they would have destroyed us completely. But the humans hadn't been content to simply drive off the invasion. As the Kethmori fleet fled, human ships had pursued them, attacking damaged vessels and preventing them from regrouping. Chase herself led the pursuit, Zexthara continued. Her ship, the Indomitable, followed us all the way to the edge of the system. She could have destroyed my flagship easily, but instead she sent me one final message. Chase's message had been brief but unforgettable. She had told Zexthara that this was how every invasion of human space would end. She had explained that humans would never stop fighting, never surrender, and never forgive. Then she said something that still gives me nightmares, the old commander whispered. She said that humans had friends now, other species who had learned to respect them. If the Kethmori tried to attack human space again, we wouldn't just be fighting humans. We would be fighting half the galaxy. The war had ended 2 weeks later, not with human surrender but with the Kethmori Empire asking for peace terms. The cost had been too high, and the humans had proven they were impossible to conquer. We learned that humans had been in contact with other species throughout the war, Zexthara explained. They had been sharing technology and forming alliances. By the time we sued for peace, 12 different alien governments had agreed to defend human space. The peace negotiations had been conducted on a neutral station. The human representative had been Admiral Kate Sullivan, the same officer who had commanded the first organized resistance against the Kethmori invasion. Sullivan was reasonable but firm, the old commander said. The terms were simple. The Kethmori Empire would withdraw from all human space and pay reparations for the damage we had caused. In exchange, humans would not pursue our retreating forces or attack Kethmori territory. But Sullivan had added one final condition that had chilled every alien diplomat present. She said that humans were now a known quantity in the galaxy, Zexthara continued. Any species that attacked human space in the future would face the same response we had experienced. She said that humans would make sure that everyone understood the cost of threatening Earth. The old commander finally picked up his drink and drained it in one gulp. That was 3 years ago. Since then, no species has even considered attacking human territory. When humans say never again, they mean it. He looked around the table at the young officers who had wanted to hear war stories. Their faces were pale and several of them looked sick. You asked me about fighting humans. Zexathera said quietly. Now you know. They don't fight for territory or resources or glory. They fight to make sure nobody ever wants to fight them again. And they're very, very good at it. The old commander stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. Take my advice, younglings. If you ever encounter a human ship in space, you do two things. First, you send a message of peaceful greetings.